politics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
Welcome to Point of View, and thank you for being with us today. We have a great show. It's a special day, one that I'm really excited for because our focus is the pro-life movement in a post-Roe landscape. It's a big day. Today is the 53rd anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision, which tried to claim that abortion was a constitutional right. And thanks to Dobbs v. Jackson, now we are almost 4 years out from Roe not being the law of the land anymore. But the pro-life movement still has a lot of work to do. The March for Life will happen in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. And so we need to talk about it. We need to talk about the status of the pro-life movement today and how we as Christians and pro-lifers can help women and children. And so I have Chelsey Youman, who is with me on the show today. We're co-hosting. You know her well. Chelsey, it is a great time to be a pro-lifer, isn't it?
It is. It is certainly. I say, I used to tell my husband that someday we'll be sitting on our front porch in some rocking chairs and Roe will be something of the past. And we were able to say that in 2022. And it's such a blessing to be a part of the post-Roe generation, to be raising children, to be advocates for the littlest, most vulnerable humans on earth, which are those in the womb. And it's an incredible thing that we were able to witness. And I'm so grateful it didn't take until I was elderly and in a rocking chair. It happened soon. But there were many for decades who had a hard fight for 50 years. They watched 63 million children die by abortion. Advocates for decades in the Pregnancy Resource Center movement in our churches, even just cultural warriors who fought that fight. And I think the victory is the Lord's. And I'm so grateful He answered all those decades of prayers.
Absolutely. And I think that's an encouragement for us today because, we're celebrating now that Roe is in the past. But like you said, for so many of us, we thought it would be years more down the line. And so no matter what battle we're facing now, whether that's chemical abortion, which we'll talk about in the show, or just meeting the needs of moms, I think we need to be encouraged and stay focused and prayerful because we've seen victory and we can see it again. But we have a very special guest this first hour with us, Nallely Perez. Nallely, thanks so much for being with Point of View today. Nallely, well, we may have lost her, Chelsey, but Nallely, just to give a little background before we get her back on the line, she actually worked for Planned Parenthood, and now she has an amazing story. I can't wait to get her back on the line because she's going to share her testimony and how she is now doing pro-life ministry. And so I want to talk to her about that, but also, Chelsey, something that you and I have been talking about, too, in the background is the real story behind Planned Parenthood. They've received some big blows lately, and it's about time because they have been scamming women for quite a long time.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's an entire industry built on lies, scientific lies, medical lies, cultural lies. So it doesn't surprise me that they're scamming women at this juncture, but they certainly were very successful. Really, if you look at the history of Planned Parenthood at integrating into communities of need, communities, predominantly minority communities or impoverished communities. 80% of Planned Parenthoods are within walking distance to predominantly Black communities. And that really began at its inception with Margaret Sanger, which is a name many of you are probably familiar with. Margaret Sanger, who said her entire goal, I think she was the sister-in-law to Charles Darwin, and her entire goal was to eradicate what she would call the unfits, populations that were what she called undesirable populations. So minorities predominantly, racial minorities, but also those with mental health or criminal struggles. And she said, what we'll do is we'll start here in New York and we'll integrate into a Black community, and how we will sell it as birth control and family planning is how we're going to market it, is by getting the pastors on board. And so what she did was she got church pastors in their communities on board saying this is your way to help get out of poverty. She sold that lie as lie number one. You have to kill your child in order to be successful. That's where that lie started. That certain people groups are undervalued and unable to be parents. That's lie number two, which is a eugenics lie. And we see those lies pervasive today when it looks at Planned Parenthood.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So we'll continue talking about that. But Nallely, I think you're on the line with us. Welcome to Point of View.
Hey, thank you guys very much for having me on today. I am very, honored to be on.
Yes, well, we're so excited to talk with you. So let me just introduce you a little bit. Nallely, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, worked for Planned Parenthood in Santa Maria, California for 1 year. And she's going to tell us about her testimony and story. But now she works as the operations manager for Pro Love Ministries and Loveline, and helps women who are experiencing difficult times while pregnant. So again, Nallely, so excited to have you on today and to hear your story. But before we go to our first break, we got a couple minutes. So just tell us about how you found yourself working at Planned Parenthood and what was that like?
Yes, so in this moment of healing, I realized that what took me into applying for Planned Parenthood was my husband at that time. We already had 4 kids, and I was only 21 years old, okay? And we already had 4 children, and he walked into Planned Parenthood asking for a vasectomy, and they did it because they were like, okay, well, we want to help you not have more kids. So that's what led me back to apply back to Planned Parenthood when I was applying for a job. And, because I was like, okay, I struggle. I have a hard time with all my children. I want to help others to not go through what I'm going through. And like if it was a bad thing, right? But I wasn't just close to my faith. I wasn't close in my relationship with God. So I saw it like a bad thing, like, just having a lot of kids. And like I said, I was a teen mom at the age of 14. And by the age of 19, I already had 4. And my relationship was very rocky at that time. And I found this job, and they offered me $1 more because I was bilingual. And then 3 months in, I got a $100 bonus. So I was like, this job really cares for me. This job really is watching over me. So I'm going to continue doing my best.
And I think that, thank you so much for sharing that, Nallely. Your story really does emphasize that, it's often people who are in a vulnerable position, and Planned Parenthood posits themselves as being, the answer, the one that can help. So we're about to go to a break. We got about a minute left, but Chelsey, I'm going to kick it to you. Any thoughts or things that we'd like to discuss with Nallely when we come back in a few moments?
Yes, your story is so powerful because it's real and it's authentic, and it shows that this issue is at its core about sometimes families and women hurting. They are facing very real challenges, unable to make rent, very young. Some women that we served at Human Coalition not able to pay their bills. So they were rotating water 1 month, electricity another. It's real challenges, and I think it's important we highlight that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you for being with us. If you're just tuning in, it's pro-life themed today, the pro-life movement in a post-Roe landscape. So we are interviewing Nallely Perez right now, and we're going to hear about her testimony and her story, and we're so grateful that she's with us. In the next hour, we will interview Clare Ath, who works with Human Coalition, and she is a wonderful pro-life advocate, and we're going to discuss the state of the pro-life movement today. So if you would like to follow along with what we're talking about, go to pointofview.net. We have some links up there posted so that you can learn more about what we're talking about, find links to our guest information, and we will be back with Nallely and Chelsey right after this short break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Rich Lowry believes Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is making the right decision about so-called gender-affirming care. The HHS is pushing back against such treatment for children under age 18. They have engaged in several regulatory actions that will discourage doctors and hospitals from continuing the practice. As part of the effort, HHS released a review of the state of research into gender-affirming care. The study establishes that this suite of interventions involving puberty blockers and cross-sex hormone therapy as well as surgery has been justified by a bogus, ideologically driven scientific consensus. Now, lest you think that that's merely a partisan reaction, consider that most of the authors engaged in the report describe themselves as left of center. They explain that much of the justification for such aggressive treatment of pediatric gender dysphoria came from flawed Dutch studies. The author of those studies were aware that gender reassignment surgery in adults wasn't solving their mental distress, so they concluded that earlier interventions might be more successful. The studies had small sample sizes and no control groups. 2 years ago, I had Dr. Miriam Grossman on my radio program to talk about her book, Lost in Transnation. She not only pointed to those problems with the study, but also described other concerns with the Dutch studies. Most European countries no longer pursue such treatment. Fortunately, the United States has decided to follow the rest of the world and realize that such treatments have imposed real physical and emotional harms. The HHS Secretary deserves our praise. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Thanks for being with us today for our pro-life show. We can also say it's the pro-love show. We're interviewing Nallely Perez right now, who is with Pro-Love Ministries in Loveline. But Nallely, a moment ago, we were talking about what led you to actually work at Planned Parenthood in the past. And you were talking about it was a vulnerable time in your life. You were young. You had 4 kids. It seemed like Planned Parenthood was really there to help and take care of you. And I was wondering if you could also comment on what did you notice about the women coming in for abortions during that time that you worked there? Were they also often struggling or going through something difficult?
Yes. So Santa Maria, California is a place where very minority people live, right? So it's women who don't even speak Spanish. They speak a dialect. So when we were getting these clients, we wouldn't even communicate with them of what they were going to go through. We would communicate through a partner, through a husband, boyfriend. We had no idea of who they were, but all they would do is just look down at the desk and just shake their heads like if they understood what I was saying and sign the forms. So in that moment, I didn't know if these women were coerced or if they even knew what they were going to go through. And a lot of the women, when they went through the abortions, had a rosary in their hand crying. And I remember a specific time where one of them was, "Can you hold my hand?" And I was like, why am I going to hold your hand if you put yourself in this position? And I held her hand, right? But I was trying to not make that connection in that moment because probably something in my heart was telling me, hey, this is not okay, but you had to do it anyway. So I held her hand. She was crying a lot. And then after that, I didn't see her. So, and we didn't have like the permission, or we weren't allowed to ask them what pushed them to have an abortion or why were they in there. All we cared about was for them to sign that paper and make the payment, and that was it.
Wow. Chelsey?
It's just so heartbreaking when you think of how many women that is their experience. And it's such a far cry from what we're told, by the Shout Your Abortion, women's empowerment, feminism, it's such a far cry from that. What the truth is it's devastating. And we know from serving women at Human Coalition who are seeking abortion, when we asked them, would you prefer to parent if your circumstances were different, that 75% would say yes. 75% of women who have an abortion would rather be a mom. And that's really devastating. They just can't see a way out of their circumstances. I wanted to ask you, Nallely, if you saw a lot of trafficking victims, you mentioned coercion. I think it would be really hard when you see, we've heard of so many stories of women coming in with a man and she's not even allowed to speak to the staff of the abortion clinic. It's so obvious that he's controlling the situation and everything about her and her life, let alone this decision. And I wondered if you experienced or saw any of that.
Well, I'm not sure, but I do remember there was a teen. She was only 12 years old, and she walked in 3 times, and she paid cash. We never asked how she got this or who took her in. All we cared about was, like I said, that payment and for her to sign those documents, and that was it. So, majority of the clients that walked in, they didn't speak Spanish, so we were conversating with whoever took them in, and they would translate in their dialect, and that's how they would understand. I'm not sure if that person that I was translating to was even understanding of half of the things I was saying, but it didn't matter. And now that I look back, I feel so bad, and I'm like, how many women did I lie to? How many women did I get to sign those documents? And they had no idea what they were putting themselves in.
Yeah, Nallely, I see that lie, so pervasive in our culture, where women are told this is helping, like this is a woman's right, this is what women need, and that is so. I think that was what causes a lot of people who maybe haven't taken the time to think about this, or their heart hasn't changed. Their reaction based on what they've been taught and told is that, well, this is what we need to do for women, instead of looking deeper, as Chelsey was saying, into those needs, and even asking the questions of, do you want this? Are you okay right now? And so I wanted to ask, what is the moment that it changed for you? At what point did you realize that you wanted to get out of there and do something different?
Yes, so like I mentioned, my relationship wasn't stable, and now I know why it wasn't stable, right? Because I wasn't doing good work. I was working for the enemy. So the enemy was breaking my relationship, was breaking me as a mom. So nobody at home knew what I was doing. All they thought was I was a receptionist, and that's it. I never talked about what I did at home. So my husband at that time, he was getting closer to God, and I was like, hey, let me go home and let me be a mom. And when I need to come back, I will reapply to Planned Parenthood because they took care of me. That was the mentality that I had when I left. I was like, let me go home. Let me be with my husband. Let me get working on my relationship with my kids, and then I'll come back. And I never did, which I'm so thankful for.
Wow. And so would you attribute that to a work of the Holy Spirit? Like, moving in your life at that point, because so often that's what we need. It's like we can't do that on our own strength. It really is a result of God prompting us and changing things in our hearts and in our spirits.
Yes, definitely. And my husband is amazing. Okay, so he spoke up for my first daughter. Okay, so I was pregnant at 14. That was hard. And by a couple of months in my pregnancy, I was not happy that I was going to do this. And I told him, I was like, hey, sometimes I lay on my stomach so this baby can get out because I don't want her. And he was like, how about you stop doing that? And as soon as you have that baby, I will take her and you can live the life that you think you have to live. And I was like, no, that makes no sense, right? Like, how am I going to be carrying this baby and then give it to you and that's it? I'm like, no. So I fell in love with this baby, like, from then on. And then I had her at 7.5 months. And it was the best thing that happened to me. And then he spoke up again for my son, who I was pregnant with, my third child. And they said that he was going to have Down syndrome. And I was scared. I was like, yes, I'll have an abortion. And he's like, no, you're not. And then it happened again with my fourth one, so he kept on speaking up for these kids. And then when he led me to God, thank God, God found him in a retreat. That's what turned our family around. And now, I thank him, because he's leading me to have a relationship with Jesus. And that's how I found, and then there were none.
Wow.
That's where I found that healing at a retreat with, and then there were none.
Yeah, that's amazing. Chelsey?
It's such a testament to, I think, God's faithfulness and his commitment to saving every single child. You are a child of God. Your children belong to him. Your husband belongs to him, and his redeeming work in our lives, it's never over, and he does have healing. And I think it's so incredible to hear how he gradually pulled that veil that was over your eyes off, so you could look at the situation and say, in my spirit, just this isn't right. This doesn't feel right. This is not a path that leads to life and oneness and wholeness and healing. I need to take care of my family, and that through you working to mend your own, it sounds like, marriage and your own family, God restored all. And I think that's so beautiful, and it's just a testament to his miracles in our life.
Yeah, and Nallely, another thing that your story really made me think about, and we can talk about this a little bit more after the break, but you hear, again, so many lies from the pro-abortion industry, who really, if they were pro-choice, then they would be asking those questions when a woman came in asking for abortion to see if she was being coerced or if she needed support, if that's what she really wanted. But as you said, it's not about that. But another lie that so many young people believe is that this is not a men's issue, and men shouldn't speak up, and they shouldn't have a say. But I love your testimony, and thank you for sharing that about your husband too, because that is just such a beautiful picture of a man speaking up in an encouraging and life-affirming and life-giving way. And it's something that you needed and that your children needed. And so I just want to encourage any men listening too, like that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do, is to be there as that help and support, relying on the Lord, and then speaking life into your family and into your communities. More on the pro-life movement and Nallely's story when we come back after this break.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
Welcome back. It's our pro-life day. Every day is a pro-life day at Point of View, but we're really focusing on the issue today because it is the anniversary of when Roe versus Wade was decided, and thankfully that is overturned. But the pro-life movement is still active and needs to be, because there is much work yet to be done. My co-host is Chelsey Youman, and we are talking with Nallely Perez and her story, and really an amazing testimony of God's work. And so, Nallely, I want to talk about your journey, and how did God work through that journey of healing after you left Planned Parenthood, and started that path to what you do now?
Yes, so I left Planned Parenthood in 2009, and I was living with that guilt and for a long time. And then when I started getting closer to my faith was in 2015. So it took a while. And in 2015, I went to a teen conference, and they were talking about the movie Unplanned. And as soon as I heard that this Abby Johnson, I didn't know who Abby Johnson was at that time, that Abby Johnson was working for Planned Parenthood, and she came out, and now she was talking about and making a movie. I was like, what are they going to say about Planned Parenthood? Planned Parenthood never did anything bad. So I started paying attention, and one of those previews caught my attention and really started digging in my heart. And I got home that night, and I started emailing, and then there were none. I was like, hey, I worked at Planned Parenthood a while back, but can you guys help me? Because I feel really bad. And they emailed back, and I went to a healing retreat in January of 2019. And in that moment, I felt forgiven because I was surrounded by other abortion workers that knew everything that I was talking about, knew that feeling, knew that smell of the products of conception lab, knew the sound of that machine. So we were all surrounded and never received like a ugly face or, oh gosh, you did that, I feel so bad for you. No, we were all in that room sitting down like we knew what we were talking about. So in that moment, I felt God's forgiveness, and I said, I need to speak up. I need to do something to save babies, to stop abortion.
Wow. Praise the Lord. Chelsey, go ahead and jump in.
I'm so grateful for her ministry because I think it was maybe in my mind an under-discussed or thought of, in my mind personally, aspect of this is everybody who is exposed to really the spirit of death for prolonged periods of time by working in those places. I mean, you can't even go pray outside an abortion clinic as a believer and not feel just the absolute weight of oppression that is in that place. And, you know, women walk in, you can see the spiritual battle that they're wearing walking in, and you hear about it certainly serving them through the Pregnancy Resource Center movement, just how much it is a spiritual battle. And I'm so grateful for a ministry that is about healing for the workers. Because also your story is important because it's presenting truth behind the scenes, like what was actually going on. And what you're describing is criminal conduct. One, allowing women to get abortions without consent, without maybe medical consent, if they don't understand the language they're being told. Women who are coerced, minors who are in abusive situations, that all has to be reported to the state so that they can investigate and intervene on behalf of those children. You described a 12-year-old girl. Really, Planned Parenthood was in a position to intervene on her behalf, and instead they sent her home to her abuser to continue perpetuating that abuse, which is why she showed up 3 times. And so once you start to have people who are courageous enough like you to come forward and say, like, this is what it's about. It's not about mammograms. It's not about all the things they say that they're doing, you know, Medicaid help and assistance. And most of the services at Planned Parenthood are related to abortion, and they get Medicaid reimbursement from the state. But it is only for certain aspects of their work. And so to actually hear the stories, to shed light on the darkness, you're very courageous, and I'm so grateful for your story and that it's turned you into an advocate, which is ultimately what these children and their mothers need.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, Nallely, you know, you felt that after you experienced that forgiveness, that you wanted to be a voice. So, you know, we know that abortion impacts a lot of women, whether they have had an abortion or maybe they were close to one, or maybe they have, you know, worked in that industry. And a lot of times it's not talked about. And so people may say, well, gosh, I want to look into that ministry, or I want to know more about it. So can you tell us a little bit more about your work today? I know you work for Pro-Love Ministries, and I believe that's a sister organization with And Then There Were None. So I'd love to hear about what you do today.
Yes. So when I came out of that retreat, I told Abby, hey, I think being pro-life is having to volunteer. So I want to do whatever you want me to do. So she started Pro-Love Ministries. And, you know, I started as a volunteer. And what Pro-Love Ministries is a ministry that wants to help other organizations get close so we can fill in the gap for women who are in desperate need, so women don't go in and have the abortion, because we know that women have an abortion because they need rental assistance, or because they are single, or because they can't provide a good, stable job to bring that food to the table. So we want to be that ministry. So I started with that, and that's real empowerment, right, of what I'm doing, because I serve the support line, and that's where our text messages or phone calls come in. And I talk to women who were in that position like me. They're single, they're pregnant, and they don't know what to do. They're afraid because they have no support. And I want to be that support. So where I put myself is, I put myself in their shoes, and what I wanted to hear at the age of 14. Hey, you're 21 years old, you're a lot older than me, you can do this, and I want to walk alongside with you. And if they need that voice to speak up for them, make those hard phone calls, we want to do that for them. We want to alleviate all of that, and we want to walk with them. So that's why Pro-Love is there. And then Loveline is an umbrella under Pro-Love, and that's where I work. So we want to help women, and that's the real empowerment, right? Like, hey, you can do this. It is hard, and I share my testimony with them. I share of what I saw inside the abortion clinic. I share that I was a teen mom, and that it is hard. It is hard having kids. But if you found a ministry like Pro-Love Ministries, it's amazing, because we want to walk alongside with you, and you're not alone. And it's not like we help them once and that's it. No, we have built long relationships with these moms, and you are able to see that fruit, right? Like, you're able to see those pictures of, hey, thank you very much that you talked with me, and now I have this baby. I regret that I thought about even having an abortion, but thank you guys. Thank you guys for giving me the hope that I needed.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And Chelsey, so often you will hear, you'll hear the lies that pro-lifers don't really care about women. But I'm hearing Nallely talk about the encouragement that she gives through her ministry. I know you have done it, Youman Coalition. So this is the need, and this is where pro-lifers' hearts are, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is. I always say that the pro-life movement spent decades building infrastructure. They're the only ones to serve these women holistically with real options. I think the abortion industry likes to say that it's about women's choice, which I think we all know is a joke, but instead to give them real choices and options. What do you need? Is it transportation to work? Is it a better paying job? Is it childcare is a huge, one of the number one issues women cite is I can't afford food now. How will I afford childcare when a baby gets here so I can go to my hourly wage paying job? It's real challenges. And I'll put some statistics too on this, that pro-life centers, pregnancy resource centers, outnumber abortion clinics 4-1. 4-1. And it's built on a movement of love. There's not a lot of profitability in it. In fact, it's one of the most under-donated to causes. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering, how can I actually get engaged and support, the need continues. 1.4 babies lost their lives to abortion last year. It was the highest abortion rate in 12 years was last year because of abortion drugs, which I know we'll talk about next hour, Liberty. But it is on us to get involved, to donate, to engage, to volunteer. And there's a whole host of ways you can do that. I worked with Human Coalition, which reached these women online. Loveline, I know we've heard talked about. There's adoption agencies. There's a lot of ways for you to care about and support these women.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention, too, we're about to go to a break, and then we'll come right back with Nallely and Chelsey. But we have these links at pointofview.net. So if you want to check out Human Coalition, Pro-Love, Loveline, the things that you've heard about, because as Nallely said, volunteer, then go to pointofview.net and check that out. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Chelsey and I are talking to Nallely Perez for a few more moments. Be sure to stay with us because we'll be talking with Clare Ath in the next hour about the state of today's pro-life movement. But we always want to equip you on Point of View because you are really the one that can make a difference in your sphere of influence in your community. So just before the break, we were talking about the work that pro-life ministries and organizations are doing. It is so underfunded, but people are passionate about this. And so we talked about some ways to maybe volunteer or donate. But Nallely, I wanted to ask you, you are on the front lines. You are talking with these women who are in a hard position. They're at the point where they're considering abortion, and you're able to encourage them and share your testimony and then provide that longer term support as well. So what are you seeing as the biggest need right now in the pro-life movement in a way that maybe the average person who hasn't volunteered at a pregnancy resource center, but maybe they want to step up and help women in their community? What is the need right now?
Yes, so a lot of the women that are calling in do need that financial assistance because they already have children at home. They can't find a well-paying job that can pay for daycare, and that's where they're limiting themselves to work, right? Because there's no daycare. Daycare is super expensive. So they say, if I go to work, I'm going to be paying daycare with my whole paycheck, and then I have nothing left. So it's opening those doors. Like, how can we as a church, how can we as a community provide that assistance? Is there someone that we know that takes care of children? Can we pay for that? Can we make that available for those moms? Because then they say, hey, I don't want another kid because I can't even afford the ones that I have at home. Or I don't have a big car that I can fit another car seat in there. So it's the little things that we don't see that is very important to them. So the option that we tell them is, hey, if we help you get a bigger car, can this solve your problem? Oh, definitely, yes. If we find or if we connect you to a church that can help you. Because, if I am connected to a church, I know a lot of my community. There's a mechanic in there. There's a person that has a restaurant, so they can provide meals or they can provide help to fix her car. So if we connect them to a church, that's where the help will come from. So I think as a community, I think as people that were closer to God and they think that we got it all. It's showing that, right? It's showing who we truly are, and if we want to help them and empower them, that's where the help comes from, and that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsey, I know you're going to have input on this question as well as, how can people get involved and where is the need?
Well, the need is unfortunately everywhere. And I do think part of the reason for that is just we've had a culture of abortion where it was legal in all 50 states and pretty normal. It was so normalized, in fact, that 1 in 4 women have had abortions. So it's really an astronomically high issue and predominant issue. But when we scale it down and think through, wow, this is a mass population, I do think ultimately culture is going to change as women start to have their children, as laws protect these children, and they say, wow, it wasn't the end of the world. I had a beautiful life, and I'm so grateful I had my child. I think we'll see that sea change, but those conversations start now. They start around our dinner tables. I always say that. But that number that I mentioned, the 1 in 4 women, it's the same inside the church as it is outside of the church. And so if you're looking for a way to really engage, like it seems like, oh my gosh, 1.4 million kids a year, it's such a huge issue. Is it a political issue? Where do I start? The truth is you start in your home with your family, valuing life, understanding. I'm raise my boys now. We'll go to a farm and see eggs, and I'll say, if there's chicken in the egg, is it still a chicken? Yes. Is it still alive? Yes. Like you start with this mentality of valuing life for biblical reasons. And I think it's also the next natural extension to be engaged in your community, knowing your neighbors, being involved in your church. Every single church should have resources filling these needs. That's what the church is being the church. That means when there's single moms in your church, it's a culture of, hey, we're all here to help. You have, 90 mothers now here to help you step in, to help babysit, to help house cleaning, to help her find a job. All of those are community-oriented answers and solutions. And it starts where we're already working and where we're already playing and where we're already going every Sunday, making sure our churches are engaged on this, because our pastors like to say this is a political issue, and it is not. It is a human issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from personal experience, if you start any sort of pro-life outreach in your church, if there's not one, buying diapers, and say, hey, Facebook, we'll help you out. People will come. And like Chelsey said, they're probably already in your church as well. And if you just open your eyes to your neighbors, there are so many people that you can step out and help. But we have a few more minutes. So Nallely, I really want to hear from you. What, you want people to know about, and we know we've talked about this, but any final thoughts on what do you want people to know about the women who are seeking abortion? And then for anybody who has guilt or shame with an abortion, or abortions that they have had or been involved with in the past, what is your encouragement to them as well?
Yes, well, first I want to say sorry, to women who walked into the abortion clinic thinking that this was going to solve their problem. And for many of them, probably it didn't. And so I'm speaking up for them, and speaking up for those babies that they have no voice, and I will be that voice. I speak up for the baby that I remember the most from working in the abortion clinic. He was 16 weeks. And, that's the encouragement for me every day. I think about that baby and I'm like, I don't want another mom to walk in thinking that this is okay. You could reach out to Pro-Life Ministries. You can text us and we will connect you with healing resources if you've had an abortion. Because this is what I tell them. If I need healing for only working in the abortion clinic, I can't imagine what kind of healing you guys will need in 5 years, in a day, in 2 days. I want to say that first. And I want to thank you guys for having me on. And, Pro-Life Ministries is here. Pro-Life Ministries always needs help, donations, volunteers, because we want to be that voice and we want to shut down every abortion clinic so this doesn't happen, so abortion doesn't exist. Also, I'm having my first grandbaby.
Wow, congratulations.
She's due in 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And that pregnancy, my daughter's pregnancy, has helped me heal in a very different way. Because that baby at 6 weeks was moving and had a heartbeat. That heartbeat was very strong. And at that moment, I was like, Andrea, I allowed this to happen to a lot of women. And that broke my heart. So every time that she shows me an ultrasound, every time that she comes in and I see her growing and glowing, it's helped me heal and ask for more forgiveness. I don't want another mom thinking that this is okay.
Wow. Nallely.
And
yeah, go ahead. We've got about 30 seconds, but go ahead.
Okay. Yes. So please reach out, and you're not alone, and we love you.
Amazing. Nallely, we can't thank you enough for sharing your story on Point of View today. And you are a powerful voice for women and for the unborn. And so I encourage people as well, go to pointofview.net, click on the links that we have, and get involved. You can make a difference in the lives of women and children and the unborn. And stay with us, because we'll be right back after this break.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Liberty McArtor.
Welcome back to Point of View. Chelsey, Youman, and I are talking about the pro-life movement in a post-Roe landscape. We had a great interview with Nallely Perez in the first hour, and her testimony from leaving the abortion industry and now working as a voice for the unborn. So go back and listen to that if you missed it. But I'm excited for this hour because we're going to talk about the state of the pro-life movement and where we go from here. And we have another very special guest. So Chelsey, I will let you introduce our guest for this hour.
Well, I am so especially excited to introduce our next guest because she is a former colleague of mine, a very dear friend, and an absolute leading voice in the pro-life movement. Of course, I'm speaking about Clare Ath. She's the senior policy analyst at Youman Coalition, but also has a very new, exciting ministry she's starting as an executive director. Clare, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chelsey and Liberty. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to talk with you guys.
Yes, well, Clare, we first want to hear, because you have a new title to your name in addition to the work at Youman Coalition, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But tell us about this new ministry you're starting and some of the premise and why you're starting this new ministry.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. We're planning on launching this spring. The organization is going to be called Vita et Terra, which stands for Life and Earth in Latin. And really kind of God put this on my heart to start this organization and a movement because I'm looking around and I think we all can agree and say that we are experiencing a culture of death. And so much of what we face is a cultural problem of people just not caring. They're not caring about the unborn, they're not caring about people around them, and they're not caring about the environment. And, you know, a lot of people may think it's not connected, but I firmly believe that there is an attack on all creation. So this new ministry is going to be a bold, authentically Catholic voice in the media that's advocating for both the babies in the womb and also stewarding the earth around us. Because as I sit here outside Washington, D.C., I am currently bracing for 30 inches of snow. So, yeah, it is. The environment is definitely changing.
Wow, Claire, I'm so glad to meet you over the phone and have you on Point of View today. And I'm really intrigued. I want to have you on Know Why podcast to talk about this more. But so many of the voices that we hear in the media today are, we need to protect abortion rights, air quotes, because of the environment, or we need to have fewer children because of the environment. And so I would love to have you explain why that's actually upside down and why protecting life in the womb is part of a culture of life. How are those two connected?
Yes, they're deeply connected. And so I had a piece earlier this month in the Washington Times where I really delved in to what Pope Francis talked about as the throwaway culture. And it's just this idea that anything is disposable, that if something inconveniences us, whether that be an unexpected baby or an obligation that we have, that we can just dismiss it. And that's not the case, that we need to care about everything around us. But it is very baffling to me that in much of this kind of secular left environment, there will be groups that say, we care about the planet and Green New Deal. And then in the second breath, be advocating for population control and abortion. And those two things, you can't say I love the earth, but then also I hate people. It just doesn't make any sense. And it was very unfortunate. I read a piece earlier this month in The Guardian, and it was a post-abortive mom who talked about the fact that she aborted her baby due to fears about the environment. Mm-hmm. And it just really broke my heart, because if you have a movement that is getting people so scared and so petrified that they're willing to abort their own child, when that is children are our hope, and that's what we should be encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsey.
Claire, you and I have talked about this so many times in the course of our career, just this idea. I think at first when I personally joined the pro-life movement, I thought, well, if we just tell people just don't know that life begins at conception, that people are created in the image of God. They believe that it's a clump of cells. And then I think the longer I've been at it, almost a decade now, the more I realize people know, but they don't care. And that's this culture of death, Claire, you're alluding to. And it's devastating when you think of the destruction that it's wrought. But then you even look in broader cultural terms around us, this idea that humanity doesn't have an inherent value has, I think, precipitated everywhere. And that's how you get dehumanizing one another in a political, because our political ideologies misalign. People are really justifying violence in the streets, violence against each other, and saying that it's because of political reasons. It's okay. It's justifiable. And that the roots of all of that societal harm, I believe, start here. And it starts with this idea that, do we believe, and it only really stems from the Bible. There's not really another religious creed that brings value to human life, because our Bible says God designs each human in the womb with a purpose. They have gifts and skills, and their entire life, he says, is written in the book of life ahead of them, that he knows every single day that they're going to walk through from the beginning of creation, not just the beginning of their life. That is how grand God's plan is for us. We're made in his image, and that is an honor as a son and a daughter of the living God. If we preach the value of that and continue to pray ultimately for spiritual revival, because I think it is a spiritual issue. There's a lot of lies that we have bought as a society about our brothers and sisters as fellow creations. And when we start to value life again and value humanity again, I think we start to see society change for the better.
And one of, I'm not sure if either of you are familiar, but one of the most heartbreaking studies I read was actually by the Family Research Council, saying that of women who have had abortions, that 70% of post-abortive moms self-identified as Christian, and that 4 in 10 of them were actively attending church. So that's why with kind of this new ministry, I just have such a heart to share this message and stress the importance and the value of human life with fellow Christians, is that if we as believers can't reflect these values, then how are we supposed to reach the broader culture?
Yeah, Claire, and I'm so thankful for that ministry. And it really is about what you both are talking about, is having a biblical worldview. And I think so many sincere Christians don't even realize that they have adopted a secular worldview, a way of looking at the world and understanding it. And the Bible offers us the truth. And so I wanted to take this moment too. We're about to go to a break, but if you are listening to Point of View and you appreciate what you hear, you can get more of it because Point of View actually has 3 podcasts available, mine, Know Why podcast, but also Point of View Highlights. And so the Point of View Highlights episode out today is actually an interview I did with Leah Labresco-Sargent on her book, The Dignity of Dependence. And so I believe that the dignity of dependence is really can help us think through and cast away this bad ideology of the throwaway culture that you were talking about, Claire. And so we don't want to be contributing to that idea that anything that is inconveniencing us, including other people and relationships, that we need to throw those things away. And so America has really idolized autonomy. But when we embrace the beauty of relationship and dependence on one another, then I think that's part of the answer. So check out that Highlights episode and stay with us because we'll be right back after this break.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Rich Lowry believes Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is making the right decision about so-called gender-affirming care. The HHS is pushing back against such treatment for children under age 18. They have engaged in several regulatory actions that will discourage doctors and hospitals from continuing the practice. As part of the effort, HHS released a review of the state of research into gender-affirming care. The study establishes that this suite of interventions involving puberty blockers and cross-sex hormone therapy as well as surgery has been justified by a bogus, ideologically driven scientific consensus. Now, lest you think that that's merely a partisan reaction, consider that most of the authors engaged in the report describe themselves as left of center. They explain that much of the justification for such aggressive treatment of pediatric gender dysphoria came from flawed Dutch studies. The author of those studies were aware that gender reassignment surgery on adults wasn't solving their mental distress, so they concluded that earlier interventions might be more successful. The studies had small sample sizes and no control groups. 2 years ago, I had Dr. Miriam Grossman on my radio program to talk about her book, Lost in Transnation. She not only pointed to those problems with the study, but also described other concerns with the Dutch studies. Most European countries no longer pursue such treatment. Fortunately, the United States has decided to follow the rest of the world and realize that such treatments have imposed real physical and emotional harms. The HHS Secretary deserves our praise. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Chelsey and I are talking with Clare Ath, who works with Youman Coalition. And I really want to talk about where we are today and love to hear from both of you. This is an issue close to my heart, the pro-life issue, but both of you are on the front line. So, Clare, take it wherever you want. The main battlefront or challenge that the pro-life movement is facing right now, recent wins, areas of concern. I'd love to hear your perspective of somebody who is working on this.
Yeah. So I actually have some exciting news. Before I joined the show with you guys today, I was actually at the White House this morning for an update from the director of the National Health Institute, and he had announced that officially the Trump administration has banned all research with aborted babies. And I'm not a science expert, but he was talking about intra and extra and all this stuff, but just that across the board, it's banned. So wow. I think that is great, phenomenal news. So yes. It was very exciting to get some good news.
Yeah, breaking news right here on Point of View. What an amazing update. Go on, Claire.
And so that is very encouraging, and I like to see steps in the right direction. But I will say I and many pro-life advocates we are ready to see action on mifepristone. And they talked about that a bit this afternoon, and just said that they are conducting a study and the importance of the study being rigorous. And they know that we all want it and we want it right now, but that in order for them to be able to push back against the left and against the abortion lobby, they need to make sure that all their T's are crossed and I's dotted, and that they confirm they are working on it and they hope to be done with the study soon.
Wow. Chelsey.
Yes, I mean, I think we talked a little bit on the last hour, which was an incredible hour. If you were not listening, don't forget to go back and listen to it, where we discussed, the cultural piece of this, the healing piece of this from somebody who worked, Nallely Perez, in the industry. But I think we're moving now really to, a political discussion, which is important, because what we saw after Roe was overturned was almost an exhale. Okay, the work is done. And we saw politicians, especially leading into the election cycle last year, really many of them take a step back. What we saw was Republican Party platforms amended. Many states removed pro-life policies saying, oh, we want to protect children from conception out of their platforms. And so that was really a huge blow, and not what we were hoping for after Roe. After Roe, it's the time to move. Our work truly begins. Now we can, at the state level, regulate. And so that's an important background, I think, to frame where we need to head. And first and foremost, we're seeing a bit more of that sea change where it's swinging back. I've got many legislatures right now that are in session across this state. Your legislatures are in session, and many want to start protecting children again. And I think got through the election cycle and realized the sky didn't fall. That was the huge Democrat Party. They spent millions and millions and millions on the abortion issue being the issue of the day for Kamala Harris. And it was a flop, because ultimately abortion is horrific, even for people who've had one. They don't want to go out and support it. It's viewed as a necessary evil. And so for our side to recover a little bit and say, it's time for us to call our legislatures. You have abortion drugs flooding your state, even in perfectly pro-life protected states. You have doctors mailing abortion drugs illegally across state lines with zero repercussions, because their states, the Democrat states, have passed what they call shield laws that say you can murder as many children as you want in the womb and not go to jail or get sued. So Texas was the first to move, I think, with a resounding response to shield laws and to this phenomena of telemedicine abortion, where women log online and have abortion drugs on her doorstep without ever leaving her house within about 24 to 48 hours. And so the Texas model bill is in place. Lawsuits are coming. And if you are in a state that you care about this issue, it's time to call your legislature and say, let's do what Texas did. Or you can reach out to me. I'm Chelsey Youman. I work with Alliance Defending Freedom. We have a model legislation on addressing this issue. But you have plenty of pro-life policy people ready and willing to work.
And that's, that is such a great action point. And so I hope people really take that to heart and do that, because I think so many people are unaware of just how bad the chemical abortion pill, mifepristone, those are all the same thing, like how bad this issue really is. So I just want to mention real quickly that I have a booklet produced by Point of View, a biblical view on chemical abortion. You can contact Point of View and request it. It's just a really accessible primer to kind of learn about the history of it and the harms of it, with some more resources in the back. But Claire, maybe talk about that a little bit. Like, what are some of the problems from it, and how is it? Chelsey mentioned, like, it's moving all throughout the nation, even into places that are pro-life.
I think in a post-Roe world, one of the first and the biggest problems that we face is education, and just like a lack of knowledge on one, what the chemical abortion pill is, and two, that even if you are a red state who has banned abortion, this pill is still coming to your states. And so I know I met with a legislator one time who was very, very pro-life, and he did not know what mifepristone was. He thought that it was the morning after pill. And I was like, no, sir. These are two separate things. And so it's the education on that chemical abortion exists, and people are taking this pill. Originally, it was supposed to be up to 8 weeks, then they're moving it to 10, and then I'm hearing 12. But then in states where abortion is banned, the pills are flooding in, and like Chelsey mentioned in Texas, they now have kind of put some legislation together and put teeth into that if you illegally mail these pills, that there is going to be repercussions. When up until Texas, there was no bill like that in any other state. But I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful on the education front that we are getting the word out, and I think it is just so important that we stress to people just how serious and dangerous the chemical abortion drug is. There was a study earlier this fall by Ethics and Public Policy Center, and they had said that looking at insurance claims data from Medicaid and TRICARE, and so government insurance, they were able to see that more than 1 in 10 women who took the chemical abortion drug had severe adverse effects that warranted an emergency room visit. So this is something that is deadly to the child, but also very serious and affects the woman's health as well.
Wow. And, a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, there was actually a Senate hearing on the danger of the abortion pills. And one of the things that bothered me so much, but unfortunately not too surprising, is that pro-life advocates, pro-life senators, and the witnesses that were there kept stressing the danger to women, including the danger of coercion, which we talked a little bit about in the last hour. And the response from one of the Democratic senators was, we know that women have been coerced into abortion for decades, and just kind of threw it away like, well, does that mean that we're going to excuse it happening even more now? But I think you're so right, Claire, that we do need education on this issue of how prevalent it is and how it is harming women. But your thoughts, Chelsey?
Well, I think the word is getting out about that. I think ultimately it's been a difficulty. I always think of the policy side because that's where I work. On how to go about this. And the truth is, you may or may not know this, that there's a federal law right now enacted that prohibits mailing abortions. Any abortion materials. It's called the Federal Comstock Act. It's enacted. It's from the 1800s. And under the Roe regime, it was simply not enforced. And so our DOJ right now under President Trump could be opening investigations on all these doctors and drug manufacturers for mailing these drugs overnight. It's just that we haven't seen a lot of that willpower to do so. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag, I would say, at the federal level, if that's where we're talking about right now with the President Trump administration. They said we're going to be investigating these harms to women. We've been discussing the FDA should never have approved this drug in the first place. It was approved really by the Clinton administration in 2000, and it was done without any of the right protocols in place, and they rush jobbed it, and then they went overnight under President Biden to say, okay, we can mail these drugs now without redoing any of the testing on the impact of harm that would have to women. That's illegal. It's incumbent upon the FDA to do their due diligence when they approve a drug and the way that it's distributed, particularly a drug that is one of only about 60 that has a black box warning. That's how dangerous it is. And so all that to say, we were really hoping the FDA under, Robert Kennedy Jr. would be willing to take a look. He said he would be willing to take a look, but we haven't really seen much transpire there. We're hopeful, except for the fact that under President Trump's FDA, a new generic version of this drug was approved this year. And so we desperately need your prayers that the FDA will do its job. There's so many ways that this really terrible tragedy could be ended, and we just need to keep praying and working and advocating for that to happen.
Absolutely. So we're about to go to a break, and then we'll come back and discuss more of the state of the pro-life movement. But as a reminder, reach out to Point of View, ask for this booklet on chemical abortion, and educate yourself and others. We'll be right back.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth. It's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Liberty McArtor.
Welcome back. It is the pro-life movement in a post-Roe landscape. That's the topic of discussion for today. And so I do want to ask both of you, Claire and Chelsey, your thoughts on just kind of the practicality of where a lot of pro-lifers see themselves. Many are single-issue voters. And so, Claire, you just shared a minute ago some exciting news from the White House that federal funding for research on fetal tissue has been ended, which is a huge victory. And if people don't understand why, think back a few years to the undercover investigations that revealed some more of the corruption at Planned Parenthood, where they were, that funding for those aborted babies' bodies, unfortunately, was something that Planned Parenthood executives were wanting to continue. And so it's really great that that has ended. But as Chelsey noted, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. I think sometimes maybe pro-lifers have been one day really happy with something that the Trump administration has done, and then another day feel kind of like, hey, hold on now. And so, practically, where do we find ourselves? Obviously, this is, like I said, the top issue for a lot of Americans. And so how do we navigate the political landscape in a way that's going to be the most effective for life, Claire?
Yeah, so it is a tough time to be a pro-lifer right now because, as you said, it is a bit of a mixed bag. But when I think about that, it just really makes me more emboldened to want to get involved and fight for these unborn babies, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what letter you have in front of your name when you're a politician. You need to be accountable to the voters. And I think that as Christians, sometimes we may not want to get involved in politics. And I know that we're not of this world, but we're in the world. And to that, I would say it's just very important to get involved at the local level and make sure that you are supporting candidates who hold your values, or maybe even run yourself. But that we need more good people who are ready to stand up and fight for the unborn.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsey?
Yeah, I have this member in a legislature. I won't even say which state because it might give it away. And he was a very Republican member, and he was always very quiet about the life issue. And I said, I know you're pro-life. Why are you so quiet on this one? Why won't you co-author this bill? And he said, well, my district, I get about 100 protesters from Planned Parenthood in my district every year. They all show up. It wasn't that many. It was 100, right? And he said, I never really hear from the pro-life side. So It really starts with us as constituents saying, okay, we're going to donate to you based on this issue. We're going to vote for you based on this issue. We're going to host, you can even host, these fundraisers for your local representatives, your state senators, and they will prioritize your issue. It can be that simple, but they have to know you're going to back them. They have to know you want to show up for them. They can't only hear how loud the other side is or hear nothing at all, which really just makes them not very motivated to work on the issue. So I think that's one thing. I think really continuing to be vocal. I know I mentioned the Republican Party platforms. I think the significance of that is they're really hard once you lose something like that to get back. It's a lot of ground that was lost. And so to say, we're going to vote in alignment with our values. We're going to have our pastors engaged on this issue. And then if you're in a state like Virginia where you have an abortion ballot initiative coming your way, what that means is your state on their ballot this fall is going to get to vote whether or not to enshrine the right to end the lives of children in your Constitution. That's what that ballot initiative does. And so many states have passed that because voters haven't shown up and they haven't voted on that issue. And so for you to make sure you get your church rallied and you go canvass door to door and you really engage in your community to turn out the vote, I think those are really important ways that we sometimes forget. These legislators are elected officials, so they want to know what people will be willing to elect them for.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Chelsey. Either one of you, feel free to jump in on this. But yes, I wanted to highlight that because that's another education issue. The ballot initiatives, I read stories where a lot of women who are actually pro-life voted in favor of adding abortion to their state's constitution because they thought that that would ensure that women got miscarriage help if they went to the ER, because they heard all these stories in the media that women are getting penalized for going to the hospital. And then you also hear, hey, late-term abortion doesn't happen. If I'm understanding correctly, the ballot initiative in Virginia enshrines abortion all the way through pregnancy into the state constitution. So let's, as part of the education, bust a few of these myths here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so many ways to tackle this issue. We've talked about how you can show up in your communities and serve women and serve your neighbors, how to, have our churches talking about this issue. But I do think we're seeing a sea change. I do think when Governor DeSantis, Governor Youngkin, Governor Abbott are great examples. They passed some of the most pro-life protections in decades, right before the midterms last cycle. And they all won by huge margins because I think, like you said, there's many single issue voters out there, but people are looking for leadership. People want to know what they're coming out to vote for, not just against. And especially on our side, where I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of momentum on so many issues we all hold dear. But this one is one we have to work harder at because the other side is beating us with a ground game.
No, and I think it's very important that we praise and celebrate when our politicians do good things, but that we also need to call them out when they do things that aren't good, and that can often be effective. I think a great example would be in the past week or so at the federal level. I'm not sure if he misspoke or what he meant in broader context, but President Trump had talked about the Hyde Amendment and the need for Republicans to be flexible on the Hyde Amendment in our conversations about the Affordable Care Act and extending subsidies. Almost immediately, there was a very large backlash from pro-life leaders across the country. And as a result, they have now clarified that that is not what he meant and that, yes, they will always stand firm and keep Hyde protections. But I think that as Christians and as pro-life individuals, it's just so important that we call out leaders when we see things like that happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Claire. And I was so glad to see the backlash to that, too. I mean, every single pro-life organization I follow was saying, absolutely not, Mr. President, we're going to keep the Hyde Amendment. And so another thing that I think people may have heard in the news, and so since we're kind of talking about the politics of it, I want to give either of you a chance to maybe jump in if you know more about this. But there was a report that Planned Parenthood had actually received funding when they weren't supposed to receive funding. But it seems that there was a little bit more to the story behind that. And I'm sorry to throw this out there without really talking about it beforehand, but is that something that either of you have insight on? Because I know that was also concerning to a lot of pro-lifers who may have seen that in the news.
Yeah, I'd say, I don't know if Chelsey wants to go first, but I do have a little bit of insight that I had seen that same story and immediately was like, oh, this is very bad. But I had heard, and Chelsey is a lawyer, but that wasn't so much as the Trump administration walking back their promise to defund Planned Parenthood, but that the lawsuits that were involved, that it wasn't going to hold up in court. And so they are still defunding Planned Parenthood with the congressional legislation that went through, but that in an effort to not have to pay out the legal fees in this case, it was settled. I don't know, Chelsey, if you know any more on that.
Well, I don't know a ton of details other than that they were facing a $2 billion windfall for they essentially committed Medicaid fraud. And so the states of Texas and Louisiana and many other states rightfully defunded Planned Parenthood when stories of the atrocities, absolute atrocities that were happening within the walls of Planned Parenthood came out. Well, Planned Parenthood kept submitting their forms for Medicaid reimbursement thinking we're untouchable. No one would ever pull our funding. But the states did. And so all of that had to be reimbursed. And there were triple fines because that's called Medicaid fraud. And you're removed from the program and continued to bill the program. So they were facing a $2 billion windfall, which is twice as much as their revenue. And so, which when you think about it, $1 billion revenue on abortion industry is absurd. But it was really, really going to put them under. And so I believe that it was settled. I do know that that's an area we continue to work on at Alliance Defending Freedom, where I work now. It's one of our top pro-life issues is you've got to cripple the abortion industry that is so exorbitantly funded. And when they lose their profit motive, they lose the motivation to kill because that's the motive. It's not the same as the pro-life movement where our motive is to see, whole families who are thriving and healing and growing. What Planned Parenthood is doing since they're losing so much money on the abortion front and their brick and mortars are closing is they're switching to transgender care. So that shows a lot about where their heart is.
Absolutely. So goes to show there's usually a little bit more behind big headlines. So I'm grateful for Clare and Chelsey's insight, and we'll have more right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. It has been a great show, and I can't believe we only have a few minutes left, but time flies when you're having fun, and talking about the pro-life issue is always important. So thank you for being with us. I encourage you to go back and listen to any parts that you've missed. You can do that in podcast format at Apple Podcasts, Point of View Radio Talk Show, because Clare and Chelsey, I really do appreciate your insights, especially on some of these political issues. You guys are on the front lines, and some of this stuff is confusing. Some of it's concerning to pro-lifers, but to kind of get that insight and know what's going on behind the scenes and the things that we can celebrate and the things that we need to stand up for is so crucial. But Clare, we've talked a lot about politics, but I followed you on X for a while, and I noticed that you were just so joyfully pro-family. And you talk about your own family, and I appreciate that. And so when it comes to hearts and minds, because I think that's where the biggest battle really is in our country right now, and particularly young people, I'd love to get your thoughts on just more that we can do to create that culture of life and actually get people excited about family and excited about children. So I would love your insights on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's one of the things I probably love talking about the most is being a mom. I have, like Chelsey, 3 little boys. They're almost 2, almost 4, and almost 6, and they're crazy and they're fun. But it really breaks my heart when I read all these stats and I see the charts about people not wanting to have families and not wanting to get married. I think that the best thing we can do as Christians is just live a good life and lead in our families, and to pray that that's a reflection to others in the community. Especially when it comes to the issue of life, it's so important that we're talking about these things. Obviously, my kids are little, so you can't talk about abortion quite yet, but just the value of people and the value of life, like you can talk about it at any stage. But I really do believe that it all starts at home, and it starts with our children.
Absolutely. Chelsey?
Clare and I can't even talk about how many conversations we've had about how silly our houses are, how messy and chaotic and funny these boys are that we're raising. And it's something to be proud of and to build, right? I think God gave us really the earth to steward and families to grow. And that starts with first our marriages. That's something I'm really passionate myself about is just having a really strong marriage that's committed to not just each other, but to growth. Because we're not called to just sit and be comfortable and, stockpile money and be really cozy as Christians. We're called to really battle. And I'm also really passionate personally about our role as mothers for the kingdom, because we know that the original fall, the original sin, God placed enmity, Genesis says, between Eve and the snake, because the snake was going to come for her offspring. And I think that we see that disseminated in our culture now, today. The entire war on women, the real war on women, is the lie that women should not have children, should not get married, that we should be working 8 to 5 at this grind by ourselves. And it's led to an epidemic of loneliness. It's led to an epidemic of women not believing they're capable. Like, I'm not intelligent enough to be a mom. I'm not rich enough to be a mom. I'm not culturally in the right location yet to be a mom. And there's all these aspects that society has told women for decades that we have to cut off the very essence of who we are in order to be something we're not. And that's led to a lot of sadness. I think you can see that, not to politicize it, but you can see that today on the other side with all these protests that are happening, where we discussed this on Point of View a few weeks ago, generation of women who are not getting married. It's not a top priority for them. And that's sad, because I think there's a lot of life and joy and completeness to be had and fulfillment to be had in building something with a partner who you love, who you respect, to grow yourself and quit making your life all about you and to pour into others. There's nothing better at the end of the day than tucking your kids into bed and saying, like, we're really doing this. We got through our day. We're growing together. We're emotionally connected, and we're spiritually growing. And there's a beauty to that because you're ultimately living up to your calling.
Yeah. I mean, you were right, Claire, that education is so important, and including about marriage and family. So I mentioned the book Dignity of Dependence earlier, which I so appreciated, but also Get Married by Brad Wilcox. Institute for Family Research has so many statistics on how beneficial family is to both men and women, and that's not the message that you hear a lot in the mainstream media or from culture, unfortunately. But Claire, any other thoughts or things that you'd like to share on this pro-life issue?
I'd say very funny. I was actually just about to bring up Leah's book, The Dignity of Dependence, that you had mentioned earlier. I've read it as well. And one of the lines that really, really stood out to me is she talks about how women are not defective men. And I think that so much of the lie of feminism and the sexual revolution, it's just pushed this idea that in order to be equal, women have to become men. Mm-hmm. And that's just not the case. Like, God made man and God made woman, and we are equal in dignity, but we are very different. And so as a mom, and I'm someone who works, there has to be a balance. I don't think it's feasible for a lot of moms to commute for an hour and a half, and then sit in a desk from 9 to 5. I think that workplaces need to be more flexible to moms. And it's that line, I just really love it, and it resonates with me that we're not defective men. We are women, and it's great that we are, and we have unique strengths and talents, and I love being a mom.
Oh, man, I'm so glad you brought that up, because, yes, that is such a powerful line. And so we have covered the gamut of pro-life topics. We've talked about women who have been on the forefront of the pro-life movement since the beginning, and the value of family, the political aspect, the cultural aspect, the healing aspect. Claire, it's been great having you on the program. In our last couple of minutes, Chelsey, final thoughts as we wrap up this very special program.
Yes, I've loved today so much. It's my heart and life's calling to talk and advocate for women and their children, which I think we all can agree are one, right? What is good for the mom is good for the child, and vice versa. I would just say, I'll end on this, culturally speaking, there is so much that we have to hope for and so much that we're working for. And I think there's a world that's lost. Really, this is a gospel message. I think there's a world that's lost, searching, angry, who've been fear-mongered, and they're looking for truth. They're looking for an anchor to ground themselves in. And for us to be that light and say, we're not going to give in to what the Bible says, the world their love will grow cold. Instead, we're going to lean in and say, we're for you. We're going to serve one another as Christ served the church. We are going to be there for one another, support one another. That's what the pro-life movement is all about. And I think that ultimately truth is going to outshine the lies and that darkness on the other side. But it's on us. It's on us to speak that truth in love and to serve well.
Absolutely, Chelsey. So well said. And so, again, thank you who are listening for being with us today on this show. And I just want to echo what Chelsey said and encourage you. You can be that light in your community, in your church, among your neighbors, and in your family. And you can be the pro-life voice, which is really just that's God's heart. It is the pro-human voice, and every single member of the family is valuable and precious. And so, as a reminder, we have so many resources available for you. Go to pointofview.net. Click on today's show. You will see links for Chelsey, Claire, and I, also Nallely from our last hour. Click on those links, get involved, volunteer, donate to those pro-life ministries. Don't forget the March for Life is tomorrow in D.C. Vice President Vance will be speaking, so you can watch that. That'll be great. And then come back to Point of View tomorrow for the weekend edition. I'll be there along with Kirby, and we'll see you then.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.